Namaste, disciples, devotees, and seekers, to Evenings with Sraddhalu. Today he will speak on the intuitive mind from the synthesis of yoga and continuing through the record of yoga. Also, I would like to suggest that you look back at all previous talks of Sraddhalu. They are available on Integral Studies, and they are available on Mother and Sri Aurobindo YouTube. So without further ado, namaste, Sraddhalu.
Thank you, Narad. Namaste. We have been exploring Sri Aurobindo's record of yoga for the last now 17 sessions. We went through the actual text from the record of yoga, text from the notes from the disciples' notebooks, and in amplification of the concept of jnana, the supramental knowledge, we are now looking at portions of his text from the synthesis of yoga. You will recall the last time we went through the chapter titled The Nature of the Supermind, where he prepares us first by understanding what is this new state and new consciousness, and the necessity for it to be organized in us so that it can work directly through us and not through a reflection, dilution, distortion. With this background, we move to the chapter titled The Intuitive Mind. After this chapter will be the gradations of the supermind, and after that he will discuss in the synthesis of yoga the supramental thought, the supramental knowledge, the supramental sense, the supramental time sense, time vision, etc. So you understand, after explaining the nature of the supermind in the previous chapter, he prepares us to go through gradations of the supermind until we get to the full thing. And even that full thing, as he describes here, is the first entry. There is the ultimate or the highest station of the supermind, which also he describes. But in between these two is the transitional passage, which is the intuitive mind. Why this mind is so important, we will appreciate as we read the chapter, but also how accessible it is to us will also, and how to access it will be part of this chapter. So picking up from where we left off in the last discussion, we come to this text, the first paragraph of the chapter called The Intuitive Mind. The original nature of supermind is the self-conscience and all conscience of the infinite, of the universal spirit and self in things, organizing on the foundation and according to the character of a direct self-knowledge, its own wisdom and effective omnipotence for the unfolding and the regulated action of the universe and of all things in the universe. Again, a long, complex sentence. But as we go through it, we will appreciate what he has transmitted through this in terms of also experiential content, but also in terms of intelligent understanding. You understand here, he starts with the definition of the nature of the supermind in its original nature. Again, that's a qualifier, its original nature. And then there is a diluted or reflected nature, which is not the concern now. But what is the nature of the original? What is the original nature of the supermind? The original nature, a further qualifier, in its self-awareness, in its all-awareness of the infinite. Sorry, is the self-awareness and the all-awareness of the infinite. So he uses the word self-conscience and all conscience. And why not use the word awareness, which would be an equivalent translation? And this we appreciate when we understand Sri Aurobindo was a master of both Greek and Latin. And the word conscience, if you go back to the Latin roots, con is with, scio to know. With knowledge, innate knowledge, inside out knowledge, that's the sense that it conveys. So when you say, my conscience hurts me, it is an inside out knowledge, not a rational knowledge. It's a knowledge which is innate to you, in identity with you. So the use of this term as distinct from awareness suggests something, that the supermind consciousness is an innate, direct, and a knowledge in identity. So it is the self-conscience, it knows itself fully, but the all-conscience of the infinite. So when the infinite knows itself in essence, and when the infinite knows itself in its infinity, it is there that you find the original nature of the supermind. But the infinite with a capital I is the conscious universal spirit and self, not only transcending, but also in things. So implicit to this formulation is the idea that it is the same infinite which you see as if outside you, outside things, outside the universe, but which is also the universal spirit and self in things, in the universe as well as in each thing. And so you see the way he structures it, it is a complex sentence, but in the very complexity are very important relationships and suggestions or implicit ideas held. And this original nature of supermind, self-conscience, all conscience of the infinite, in everything included as well as outside everything. That's not all we call the supermind. That organizing on the foundation and according to the character of the self-knowledge, its own wisdom and omnipotence, and unfolding and regulated action in the universe. So here comes the second facet. It's not just knowing, it is also its power to organize. So there is a knowledge aspect, there is a power aspect, and in the power aspect, you will find further nuances of a rich, detailed fullness. So organizing on the foundation and on the character of this direct self-knowledge, its own wisdom and effective omnipotence. It organizes both the wisdom and the all power. But all power turned to action for the unfolding and the regulated action of the universe and of all things in the universe. So the entire universe is unfolding as if, is regulated, organized, held as if in its all knowledge and all power. Not only the whole universe as a whole, but each thing in the universe and all things in the universe are so held. Now, straight away, you have a certain sense of what this is. You're seeing an aspect of knowledge, the way the infinite and the spirit knows itself, the way it works out, the way it unfolds, the way it acts everywhere, in everything, as well as in the totality of everything. Here you get a first glimpse of this original nature of the supermind. Why is this important? Today, increasingly we find people throwing this word around without understanding it. And if you have read this and even understood slightly what he is describing and the further paragraph as we will see it, which goes much more deep into this, you would not make common mistakes that you find people making. Somebody had vision of golden light or feels golden light, feels some play of some spiritual force, could be any grade, and says, I'm seeing supramental consciousness, supramental light, and it's working in me directly. No, that's not correct. For it to work directly in you, already within you, in your consciousness, the opening to the infinite should have been there. Because it is a power of the infinite. When it has to act directly, it needs a base that knows infinity. And if you have not experienced infinity in your mind, in your life energies, and all the way into your body, that power cannot act directly in you. If you put a finite cup and ask the ocean to act fully, it will shatter the cup. So what you can say at best is a degraded, reflected, reduced, or even distorted working is acting in me. That's fine. You could say that even your mind is a distorted reflection of the supermind. So no big deal. All universe is formed out of supermind eventually or by it eventually. So no big deal when you accept that. But to say that that's the supramental consciousness which you're experiencing would be erroneous, and you would not make the error if you understood this very basic, simple idea. Unfortunately, it's a catch-all word for anything which is higher or when people look for novelty. And so much of today's turn in publicity of spirituality is looking for novelty. They've played it all the conventional ideas. They've all been ground to the limit, all become familiar, boring, passé. And they're looking for new ideas, new terms. So they pick something, hash it out, throw that word in, and say, supramental. So recently I came across a website where somebody actually says this. I had made a note of it. I don't know if I can find that here. But the website actually states the fellow is teaching you supramental consciousness, and he puts you into supramental states and whatever. I don't know. And he calls his whole training system or teaching system supramental. He has not read this, not understood it, or is an outright charlatan. Doesn't matter. But you'll find more and more of this happening. I came across recently as a YouTube suggestion, which was titled, How to Know If You Are Becoming a Supramental Being. So knowing exactly what it might be, I just said, well, what's the degree of confusion that it is spreading? And to understand that, I looked at the video. And one of the first things it says, if you feel your body becoming lighter, then you're becoming a supramental being. If you feel you're not too hungry, then you're becoming a supramental being. It's so sad. Unfortunately, a lot of people who will come to Sri Aurobindo going through such confusing, deceptive content will already be biased with a deception. And then when they will come to read Sri Aurobindo's writings, that bias will stay as an implicit bias. Most human beings are incapable of uprooting deeply rooted ideas and implicit biases. The whole of modern, let's say, psychological manipulation is built upon this. In childhood, you were given a certain worldview when you were 5 or 6 years old. When you are 50, 60 years old, despite any other training you might have, that worldview is there implicit, sitting behind all that you've built up afterwards. To actually reverse that requires a powerful experience to counter it. And if you don't do that, you don't get it. Digressing perhaps, but it's important to understand how this works. And so by putting such confusion out there, you will find people will approach Sri Aurobindo with that distorted idea. All the more so because you have speakers of other traditions who want to abuse Sri Aurobindo and deprecate what he teaches by misrepresenting. And that goes all the way back to those teachers who were 30, 40, 50 years ago playing such games. I don't name them now. Maybe some other time, if it's required, we could explore such things, but that's still going on. And when they put that in the academic space, people will grow through and then come to the text and not recognize the implicit bias. That's why it's so important for us, at least for us, to be clear of this. It is self-conscious and all conscious of the infinite. You cannot enter in relation with it until you have opened to a living state of infinity in the mind, vital and physical. That's when you will say, now I'm beginning to perhaps experience the supermind. And if you read the next chapter where he describes gradations of the supermind, then you will understand that I am beginning to experience only the influence of the lowest gradation of supermind, and so on. But this clarity will make all the difference. And it is not to disappoint or give a wrong idea of difficulty. As we will read the chapter, Sri Aurobindo will tell you, although this huge gap exists, there is something else already within us, which is like a link. And he will use that, the intuitive mind, as the link through which the transition will be made. So we come back to this idea, self-knowledge, effective omnipotence. So not only wisdom which knows all, but all power, all effectivity. There is no other power. There is only this one power of the oneness of the infinite. We continue the text. It is, we might say, the gnosis of the spirit, master of its own cosmos, Atma Jnata Ishvara. So he takes a phrase like this, typically from, in this case, the Bhagavad Gita or the Upanishads or the Vedas. And he will take such phrases to point out that's what they're talking about, if you really want to understand that. So, Atma, self, Jnata, knowing, Ishvara, Lord. So that's Ishvara, when you actually go deeper, it is the Lord as master who is inhabiting and enjoying the inhabitation. So, self, knowing, but Jnata, again, if you come to the root of the Jnata, it is knowledge which is of this grade, where the knowledge is the experience of the thing, not a symbolic representation. So it is, we might say, the gnosis of the spirit, master of its own cosmos. Again, we come to this term gnosis. Why does he use gnosis? He just used the term self-conscience. Why didn't he repeat that? So gnosis is again a very interesting term which suggests inherent knowledge inside out and a knowing in identity. If we go to the root of the term, so a knowing in identity inside out, and it is a general term used for a higher grade of knowledge or the divine knowledge. But in this case, it's this inside out movement of the spirit, master of its cosmos. So it's not just gnosis of the spirit, it is master of spirit as it is gnosis of the spirit as master of the cosmos. Why is this repeatedly coming? Even in the earlier thing, it was wisdom and effective omnipotence for the unfolding and regulated action. Why is this important? Because in the structure of the universe, there are the higher three worlds, Satchitananda, their reflection in the lower mind, vital, physical, and in between is the supermind. So the supermind, in some sense, turns up to the Satchitananda, turns down to the mind-life body. It knows the oneness of the above, it knows the multiplicity of the below, and it is the link between the two. It is the one consciousness which is at once knowing and living in the oneness while fully engaged with the multiplicity. And therefore, it is the one consciousness which alone can bring you that oneness here in the multiplicity of life. That is why its establishment in us is the only point where we can get full mastery of life in full immersion in the full power of knowledge of the spirit. It's the link point. It links the two worlds in the Vedic terminology, the upper hemisphere and the lower hemisphere, where the join is this link of the supermind consciousness. So you'll find repeatedly this duality of knowledge and then the power and the multiplicity, oneness and multiplicity. So master of its own cosmos. Its own cosmos, the cosmos is owned by it. It lives in it. Everything is an expression of it. There is no other. So if you logically follow these, again, there are implications, but you understand the importance of this idea. When it is its own cosmos and there is no other, one of the things which happens is, if it applies itself in an action this way and elsewhere an action another way, it knows both actions. And it ensures or holds in itself the harmony of both. Even a fragment, what seeming to us fragmentary, to the supermind is known in perfect harmony. And even sometimes where the two work as if contradicting each other, it is as if my left hand and my right hand work together in harmony, precisely to create a stress to tear, to break, or to squeeze. Although they seem to be working against each other, they're actually working in a harmony. But when you break away from the supermind and you fall into a lesser grade where you see these as different forces, then you experience the collision or the struggle and the pain and so on. So when you just use this phrase, master of its own cosmos, you see there are implications. As it knows itself, so too it knows all things, because all things are itself. So for all are only becomings of itself. There is nothing other than itself becoming, flowing out, expressing. So it knows all things because they are itself expressing. It knows itself fully, so it knows all things fully. Directly, totally, and from within outward, spontaneously, in detail and arrangement, each thing in the truth of itself and in its nature and in all its relations to all other things. So 9 facets, let's say, of this knowing. So first of all, it knows directly. Our mind doesn't know directly. It knows through senses, through some way of reaching out. The knowing mind has to know something, and then there is a knowledge process in between which links. But in the supermind, the knowing is direct because you're one with the thing which you know, because you are it. Totally. So the mind cannot know totally. For example, you look at a flower, you see the surface, you do not know the inside. Even if you know the inside, you know it only in the kind of an abstraction or partiality. Do you know each fine fiber, molecule, atom, and fully, and in all their relation? That's when you would be approaching something of the supermind. So directly, totally, and from within outward, not outside in, because your mind looks at the outside and speculates on the inside. In order to go inside, it has to cut off and break the outside to cut its way in. The supermind knows inside, and from inside out, feels in identity the full knowledge to all the details. So from within outward, spontaneously. Doesn't need to make an effort. It's already there. It is always there effortlessly. In detail and arrangement. So it knows every tiniest detail of every fiber, molecule, atom. And then in relation to each other, in the arrangement, how they're arranged and why. Each thing in the truth of itself and its nature, and in its relation to all other things. So it knows, let's say a fiber, knows why the fiber exists as fiber, knows what the fiber expresses in its nature in relation to, in its action, and then each thing in relation to all other things. So even if you look at the flower's tip of, let's say, a petal, it knows its perfect relation to all other petals and the stem and everything else from each perspective, each point, simultaneously knowing all relations to all points. Now, already at this point, it is so complex that your mind would be unable to handle. It's so rich. It's overwhelming already. And the size is irrelevant. You could take a tiny pebble, you could take a whole gigantic galaxy. The mind will balk and be unable to handle a pebble. The supermind will find with the same ease the pebble as well as the galaxy because they're equally rich, equally infinite to it. One is not bigger or smaller. So you get here a sense of what it would be like to be living in this consciousness. And it knows similarly all action of its energy. Remember, the previous sentence was about knowledge. Now it's about the power and the action. Knows similarly all action of its energy in antecedent or cause and occasion of manifestation and effect or consequence. So when it knows the movement and the process, it knows from where it came to what it is going, but with full richness of all detail. So let's say you're looking at your flower, and gradually one of the petals begins to fade. It begins to become less bright and then eventually brown. And what is happening right now to the supermind consciousness, which knows flower, will know exactly its right relation with the air around the flower, the relationship with the moisture, temperature, and the balance between these, and the fact of the evaporation. So what are the external causes which are leading to this drying up? But also what will be the consequence after, as the drying proceeds, how it will grow, how it will develop. And so cause and effect consequence, antecedent and consequence, the occasion for which it's manifesting this, let's say, drying up process, and all things in infinite and in limited potentiality and in selection of actuality and in their succession of past, present, and future. So without going into each of these phrases, which will be too long, but you must actually, to really appreciate and fully enjoy what Sri Aurobindo is communicating to you, dwell on each word and appreciate each. But for purpose of lack of time, I will kind of merge these into a single description. As this is happening, let's say this part is browning out in the flower's petal, another part is beginning to brown out, etc. You could ask why this part started browning and not another. You could say, well, this had less water, another part had more moisture. This had a coating which was resilient to evaporation. That portion, the coating was thinner. But you could also say, because this part got the sunlight more strongly, that got the same sunlight less strongly. Because the air blew from the air conditioner, which came with a stronger breeze on this end and not on that end. All this would be simultaneously, spontaneously, in all detail known. But it would also know if this person walks by and moves the flower, what are all the different patterns of the drying up that could take place, for example. If somebody lifts the flower, how it might change. Every possibility of every outcome for the flower's relationship with all things around it, including the various patterns of its drying process and all consequences that might happen. Someone picks it up, puts it back now with a slightly different inclination, which might change the balance of various processes of drying. All possibility that could ever be are in all detail, infinitely richly detailed known, as well as in the limited potentiality, as well as in the selection of actuality. So all this could happen. In the limited potentiality, there's very little chance that someone would put a flame to it. So we eliminate that. But a person might pick up and put back and not correctly. So there is a limitation of potentialities of modification. And then out of that, a certain specific direction of actuality, which is likely to happen. So all those narrowing outcomes are known and in their succession of past, present, and future in all rich detail. Now you get an idea of what a complex thing. If you had to do it with mind, it's as if you have to hold a million, actually an infinite. An infinity of infinities of variations, but it's an effort. It's a struggle for the mind. But to the supermind, it is spontaneous inside-out awareness. It is flower, it is world, it is all things and all things in right relation with everything else, including flower, and all possibilities of all the relationships. Out of that, a specific outcome of certain likely tendencies of which most importantly or most distinctively, certain things might actualize. And all this is just held like this, no effort. You're aware, it's all there. That's the nature of the state of being in the supramental consciousness. The supermind, remember, is not knowing things by symbols. So when I say flower, for me, that's a word. Or in my mind, an image comes of flower. But if I say flower, in the supramental consciousness, in the very act of stating it or feeling it, or you would be identified with it, you would be flower. And with this full knowledge of flower. You would say sun, you'd have the full experience of the sun. You'd be knowing it in the experience itself, not by symbolic representation of a word or an idea or an image. And so sun and flower and the full play of all possibilities of all flowers to the sun, not only on our earth, but all planets everywhere. It's not too much to the supermind, it's spontaneous, effortless ease, because it's the nature of the infinite and the way the infinite knows itself. Now, hold yourself just in conception to what that would be like. And then look back at the way your mind currently works and how much it would have to struggle upon millions of variations to try to imitate that and still not get it. That's the gap between this and that. And yet you see the spontaneity and the beauty of the supramental consciousness. It's just there. No struggle, no effort. Everything is smooth flowing, effortless, spontaneous. Compare that with the mind struggling, trying with little things and holding maybe 10 pieces of information at a time. And we're speaking of infinities here. But 10 pieces, it is struggling. That's the nature of the mind. And we are being told, hey, you know what? From this mind, you're going to go to that state. Where do we start? Is it even possible? And it's the reason why, even if they have not experienced the supermind, any experience of higher gradations of knowledge, many yogis would say, hey, this is so different, so clear, so calm, spotless, free, spontaneous. In comparison, your mind is worthless. Discard it. Sri Aurobindo's view, the mind is half-formed, building towards this. Fulfill it. Complete this transition. That's the big difference. The yogis would say, the yogis of the, let's say, earlier traditional paths, there's nothing that you can take from here to there. It's a gap. Sri Aurobindo will say, no, this is an expression of that. If that could reflect or form itself through a series of gradations to become this, then you could climb back as if through an ascending series of consciousness and substance back to that. And if you can climb back, you don't need to abandon this. You can also infuse that into this and awaken in this the ability to as if hold that. Maybe in a reduced working of some kind. What the nature of that reduction is, he will tell us later. But without losing the spontaneous character of that infinite knowledge. That is doable. That is possible. And he's showing it to you logically. So this is a revolution in thinking, in experience, and in the prioritization in the practice of yoga, of the spiritual life. It did not exist before. So we looked at the full relationship of all possibilities, past, present, future, all held. Then he says, the organizing supermind of a divine being in the universe would be a delegation of this omnipotence and omniscience for the purpose and within the scope of his own action and nature and of all that comes into its province. So if there's a being, a divine being, which is living in this power of supermind, but it's still an individual being, it is not the whole thing. So what would it carry of that? And that's what he's explaining. So two things he'll explain. For a divine being, this is how it would be. For a human being, this is how it would be. He's leading you step by step towards this. So a divine being in the universe with the supramental consciousness, he would have the delegation of this omnipotence and omniscience. You have that omnipotence, omniscience in the totality of the infinite, of that as if a projection or expression of that, but carrying that capacity, not lost. Nothing is lost, nothing has been diluted, but there is a reduction as if of the scope of its action relevant to this being. So, would be a delegation of this omnipotence and omniscience for the purpose and within the scope of his own action and nature and all that comes into its province. So let's say we will take an overmental god who's carrying something in its highest station of the supramental consciousness. Maybe it is Indra, or it is Agni, or one of the Vedic deities, Vayu. So let's say Indra, and as the Lord of the divine mind, and he's holding this power of the supermind. But because his turn is to actualize this in the functioning of mind, the focus of this capacity of full omniscience and omnipotence is now narrowed to this. You would say another being, Varuna, would be narrowing to the scope and function of that deity. And Agni would have its own specific narrowing focus of function. But all would hold the omnipotence and omniscience essentially in their origin, and the same thing would be working, but in the working would be narrowed in the scope of their province or their action. Now you could ask yourself, why? Why can't that thing act in its other scope outside this, let's say, of Indra's scope? Yes, it does. In fact, the infinite acts everywhere, isn't it? So the part of the infinite which acts outside the scope of Indra is in the scope of Varuna, for example, or in the scope of Agni, for example. So you understand, the moment you say Indra cannot do, no, he can do. But if he started doing that, that doing would be the working of Varuna. So you could, in fact, enter into a certain experience where all these gods or godlike beings would blend into each other as they approach into the oneness, and would be each aspects of the same oneness. And as they emerge in aspects, you would find the differentiation as if slowly forming and never really entirely different. Within each god, you'll find the functioning of all the other deities. Well, because they're same one, isn't it? So this is why you'll see in the Veda, actually this happens. They will take a certain deity, extol it for all its particular qualities, as if invoking and activating those qualities. And then they'll start saying, and within you is so and so, within you is so and so. They are your servants or working through you in their, as secondary helpers to you, etc. But it's just a way of seeing. Finally, you understand that if you look from a mental point of view from below up, they look like two different projections. When you actually go into the higher experience, it's the same one working with a specialized emphasis in this way or that way. As an analogy, you might say my left arm and my right arm. If at some point my right arm begins to function the place of the left arm, effectively it has become my left arm. So there is no real problem, top down. If this is what happens for a divine being in the universe, what would happen to an individual? So the supermind in an individual would be a similar delegation on whatever scale and within whatever province. So in an individual, similar delegation, scale, and province would be different. But there's one difference between the divine being and the individual. But while in the God, this would be a direct and immediate delegation of a power illimitable in itself and limited only in action, but otherwise unaltered in operation, natural to the being and full and free always. In man, any emergence of the supermind must be gradual and at first an imperfect creation, and to his customary mind the activity of an exceptional and supernormal will and knowledge. So again, long sentence is describing the two. But because it's in one sentence, you will see for each thing which he appreciates or highlights in the action of the working in the God, you have the contradiction in the human. Why? Because we are evolutionary, they are not. They are as if a direct projection from above of the supramental consciousness. We are as if an emergence from below, as if in the very opposite circumstances, emerging from inconscience. And so this makes all the difference. While in the God, this action of the omnipotence and omniscience is direct. It's not going through some secondary operation. It is always there. Indra will feel himself omnipotent, will feel himself omniscient. And an immediate delegation of a power illimitable in itself and limited only in action. So the power is directly flowing through Indra and limited only in the action because it is choosing to flow as and through Indra. And the part which is outside the limitation of the Indra choice is flowing through that other thing to which it belongs. But otherwise unaltered in operation. It operates exactly the same way as it would directly in the working of the divine consciousness as it would through, let's say, this deity of Indra. Natural to the being, full and free always. So Indra has the fullness and the freedom of that within the domain of his operation. Always, no exception, no dilution, no loss. It's just a focalization of prioritization and scope. In man, any emergence of the supermind must be a gradual. So you can't have the whole thing freely, fully appearing. It has to slowly emerge, and through gradations and degrees in which it is not yet that, but approaches that more and more. So must be gradual and at first an imperfect creation. So if you have the omnipotence or omniscience slowly forming, when it slowly forms, it is not omnipotence or omniscience. So it is imperfect. And to his customary mind, the activity of an exceptional and supernormal will and knowledge. To the mind in which we are used to, that working is so different that it seems to be unusual, exceptional. It happens sometimes. I don't know why, but when it happens, it works, but it works partially, and it fails sometimes. It seems to work sometimes, but even when it fails, I realize actually it was working right, but something else limited it and failed. And it will be an exceptional and super normal, above your normal range, will and knowledge. So where earlier you saw omnipotence, omniscience are as if intricately bound into each other and spontaneously in their working, they're united. In the human customary mind, it will be will and knowledge as separate functions, slowly emerging through imperfect stages and gradually through grades. Gradual is grade through gradations. Now he elaborates on this because the whole focus is we want to enter this. So he's showing you the rationale, a God and the human, because our starting points are polar opposites. In the first place, it will not be for him a native power always enjoyed without interruption. So for the God, it is native power always without interruption. For the human, it will not be. It's not native. I don't have it. When it does come, it's there and then it interrupts. I have no say over it. But a secret potentiality, what will it be? It's a secret potentiality. I have within me somehow this capacity. Where is it? I don't find it in me. I look inside, I look above, everywhere. It's nowhere within my consciousness. So it's secret and it's a potential, but it's there somehow because it does activate, which has to be discovered. Cover and discover. So where is it? It's covered up within me. I have to find, discover. And one for which there are no organs in his present physical or mental system. So when this thing acts, through what does it act? No physical organ, no mental organ. So for example, when we speak of intelligence, human intelligence, there is an organ for it. There is what we will call the organ of the intellect. When that has developed, it has a formation, it has a character, it has a specificity for each individual. So you'll say, oh, you have a very refined intellect. Someone else's intellect, you'll say, this is a very coarse intellect. It's not yet gone through finer gradations in its capacity even to think or to articulate. There's a difference. It's substantial difference, difference in formation. So a refined intellect versus a coarse intellect, not only in difference in substance, but also in form and then in its capacities. So we don't have any such organ through which this supermind can act, not only in the mind, but also in the physical. Now, the suggestion implicit is that if the supermind has to be organized in us, it has to develop its own organ. If it is to act in the body, it has to develop its own organ. Now, except the difference is the organ will not be like the heart and the stomach being separate structured organs. It would be in a particular gradation of substance. And as that substance organizes itself, it would build as if infuse an all-present, omnipresent something which you might even eventually call an organ. For example, and I'm not saying these are that, it's just an example. Your nervous system is an organ, but it's an organ built up by the mind when it entered the physical body consciousness and built within it a vehicle, a mechanism by which the mental impulses could become materialized all the way to the point where they modify material processes and make the muscles move. There is something else which is increasingly coming into prominence in our medical understanding of the biology, and that is what they call the fascia. Fascia. The fascia is like a kind of a network of fine fibers which holds everything together, including holding the organs together. Like if you visualize your stomach, abdominal region with so many different organs, it's like bag of fine fiber holding it all in place and holding it all in right relation to each other. It's a packaging kind of a thing. But what is interesting about the fascia is it has characteristics of the nerves, although they are not nerves. It responds to emotions and has sensations, although they are not nerves. And it's more sensitive to emotions than thought. So it actually represents a gradation where something of the, I will use the phrase vital consciousness or mentalized vital consciousness, leaning into the physical, forming another kind of an organ. But the characteristic of this organ, interestingly, is that it's everywhere, all over the body, everywhere, inside, all the way to the skin surface, even joins with the skin as if, and then internally the fibers blend, but there's no place where it is not. So many people, for example, who have unusual pains which cannot be explained, and even some kinds treating nerves or making nerves numb do not reduce the pain. It is in the fascia, because it's not in the mind as it meets the physical, it's in the emotional part as it meets the physical. So the mental vital meeting the physical. It's a different grade, a different organ that it has built up, very influenced by emotions. So when your emotions are upset, the fascia has actually gives physical pain, but without the nervous system. So there are some people who have certain malady that is called name slips my mind, where you just have pain all over the body for no reason at all. And generally it is an inflammation of the fascia which does this. So, and it's rooted with emotions. When you're upset emotionally or down emotionally, suddenly the body pains more. So you'll say, oh, it is a psychosomatic. Yes, kind of, but it has a physical basis. So I'm giving this as an example to show you that organ can be of various kinds. It doesn't have to be just a lump of tissue doing a narrow function. It can even be something which is omnipresent, as if. When the supramental consciousness builds as if in the physical consciousness an organ, it would be of a grade of substance which would be everywhere of some kind. And that would be the mediating substance, perhaps. We are speculating. When it happens, we will know for sure. But this is the kind of speculation which would be logically based, perhaps. But in the mind, similarly, it needs to build an organ. But again, in the nature of the supermind itself, it would be suffusing the mind with its substance, luminous, conscious, etc., which would know infinity. And wherever it is present, spontaneously you will feel infinity without making an effort. That would be the character of the organ. So, yes, to evolve. There are no organs in the present physical or mental system in the present, suggesting in future it could. He has either to evolve a new organ for it, or else to adopt or transform existing ones and make them utilizable for the purpose. Now comes a scientist looking at this. Okay, you have to evolve. That may take time. But what if you take an existing organ and adopt? It's interesting. Adopt, not adapt. Adopt or transform existing ones. So you take an existing organ and transform it or adopt it and make them utilizable for the purpose of the supermind's action. Obviously, that organ, that existing organ would be some part of the mind, and then he will point out that it is the part of the mind which leans to the intuition, and that will be your link, so to say. Now comes a phrase. I'm going in depth with these lines because it will give us a base, as nothing else can, of the nature of the effort and also the ease of the effort. And the next two lines will be one of those where it may seem as if he's suddenly switching into poetic mode. But try to feel it as something literal. It is something literal in the experience as it is had when you have that experience. He has not merely to uncover the hidden sun of the supermind in the subliminal cavern of his secret being, or remove the cloud of his mental ignorance from its face in the spiritual skies so that it shall at once shine out in all its glory. Okay, it's one sentence with two parts. So one of these is uncover hidden sun in the subliminal cavern. The other is remove from its face the clouds of mental ignorance. You have two pictures. The two pictures have different directions. One is inward, subliminal. The other is upward to the sun and the sky above. If you look at the broad approach of the practice in the integral yoga, there is this inward movement which opens to the inner ranges. The inmost is the psychic center, but that is only the focal point of our individuality. The full range of our inner range would be what he would call the subliminal ranges, gradations. And not only they deepen within, they also widen out into infinity. Similarly, an upward opening widens out into infinity. So in these two directions of the infinity, you have as if two approaches to the supramental consciousness. In both cases, you will find he uses the analogy of the sun. Again, this we appreciate in other texts or later on, perhaps in the same text in other chapters, when he discusses the supermind as the analogy of the sun is evident for two reasons. First of all, you see it like that in the higher states. It's brilliant, intense light and heat, except it's not heat, it's power. So the knowledge, will aspect, there becomes omniscience, omnipotence as light and heat. Intense. So intense has to be infinite when you reach that. But by then your consciousness has become familiar with the infinite and is living in infinity. So infinity can meet infinite light and heat or power and know it fully without being blinded. The mother makes this very interesting comment. She says, somewhere in the agenda, I think, that if your consciousness as it is were to see the supramental sun, you would see it as black because you can't see it. It's not that it blinds you. You just can't see it because you are in a finite consciousness which cannot know infinity. So because it can know a piece, it tries to reduce to a piece, it gets nothing, so it sees as black. And yet it feels the presence. So often it may happen in the spiritual life that occasionally we approach something, some experience, and then you feel as if a veil. You feel the thing is there, but as if a veil, a separation, something which prevents you from entering. And that's generally because of this, that within you, the capacity to perceive has not yet been sufficiently built. So you should stay there, habituate yourself to it. Let its influence prepare you and build the capacity in you, and it will prepare in you the capacity to meet it. Or it will give you the capacity and make you meet it. Many variations which could take place. So these two images are actually literal descriptions. Let's explore each. Uncover the hidden sun of the supermind in the subliminal cavern of his secret being. So there is a secret being. We think we know ourselves. No, we don't. We are like the proverbial tip of the iceberg. Within is this huge thing. But as I said earlier, it opens out to infinity. So it's not even tip of the iceberg, which is 1/10. This is 100, 1000, 1 millionth, because increasingly it opens out to infinity in each range behind mind, vital, physical, all the way. And that infinity eventually unites with the whole universe. So in a sense, you could say the whole universe is there behind, within you. If that be the case, the knowledge, self-knowledge of that infinity is the supermind within you. And so it is the hidden sun in the subliminal cavern of the secret being. You don't even know yourself. So why is he putting this first? Because it is this awakening of or opening to the supermind from the inner experience which would prepare you for receiving the influence of the supermind from above. So the natural sequence. And so the other way is, or remove the cloud of his mental ignorance from its face in the spiritual skies. So at the same time, this supermind is in the hidden subliminal cavern. At the same time, it is in the spiritual skies, not in the physical skies. So as you open to the inner ranges of consciousness upwards, you experience ranges, and beyond them all is the infinity of the infinity. And there, obviously, the way it knows itself is the supermind. But your mental ignorance is like clouds, which you need to remove from its face so that it shall at once shine out in all its glory. At once, both within and above, shine out in all its glory. If you appreciate the image and the literalness of it, not merely as a poetic symbolism, you get a glimpse of how that experience can eventually unfold in you. Not yet, because we have not yet familiarity with infinity. That takes time. But as you build the familiarity, it will be there. It's already there. If you were to see it, it would be black. So no use. But its influence can gradually prepare you. So if this is what you have to do, he says, he has not merely to do this. So what else does he have to do? That is in the next sentence, which tells you how much more laborious the difficulty is because we are going bottom up, unlike the gods who are top down. So his task is much more complex and difficult than the gods. And much more than this, just uncovering. His task is much more complex and difficult because he is an evolutionary being. Oh, what a pity, isn't it? But what a wonderful thing, being an evolutionary being, forget the difficulties of the task. Being an evolutionary being, you can experience all the way from the bottom to the top, all the ranges, which the gods cannot. That's for another point. The mother says it this way, the gods need to incarnate on earth if they want to develop their capacities. Within their own range, they can grow only so much. If you want to grow more, you have to incarnate. Why? Because bottom up, you're forced to integrate all the ranges, and that's how the evolution takes place. So we set aside that discussion. It's too broad, but do not worry about this. Because he's an evolutionary being, his task is more complex and difficult. And by the evolution of nature, of which he is a part, he has been constituted with an inferior kind of knowledge. Because we're a part of nature, capital N, so all over the universe. It's happening on all planets. So because of that evolution, we are all constituted with this inferior kind of knowledge, the mind. And this inferior, this mental power of knowledge forms by its persistent customary action an obstacle to a new formation greater than its own. So this is the problem of evolution. First of all, you got this inferior kind of knowledge. You didn't do anything about it. Nature did it. She evolved you and as well as all others, beings. And this inferior mental knowledge, power of knowledge, by its persistent customary action forms an obstacle to the new formation. So where is the problem? The problem is not that you have inferior knowledge. The problem is that it has a persistent customary action. It works the way it does with the persistence and refuses or blocks, prevents the new formation greater than its own nature. So let's say your nature is able to do this. Now something else greater comes. And this thing says, I cannot, if I try to do that, I have to do it by my way, and it persists in its own way to try to get that, which obviously it doesn't. I will give a different example here, which has a similar character. You want to make your mind silent. What do? Silence, 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 silence. Your customary way of doing something is to think about it. You want to make it silent, you think about making it silent, you think of silence, and you don't make it silent as a result. Because they're fundamentally different. The thought power or thought process of doing things by activity, when it approaches something which is silence, it has to still. So you have to not to do in order to get to what you want to do. It's something like that when you're opening to the supermind. Only it's much more the opposite, because the way the supermind knows is so different that they're literally polar opposites. So you have to abandon all your current instinctive ways of knowing and thinking and action and replace by literally something that works in the opposite way. How do you do that? You can't. The very effort to do that is your effort. It seems impossible, isn't it? But he will show you how it is not only possible, but easy and through graded steps. That's the beauty of Sri Aurobindo. Not only he tells you it's possible, he shows you in such a logical and clear understanding with all these details and nuances of the understanding. And you see, when you start understanding in this way, something inside you says, oh, yes, of course. When we come to the part where it's possible. But right now I can say, oh, yes, of course, it's so different. But by understanding the difference, you will also find the link and make the transition. So what is the problem truly? Is the persistent customary action. That's the obstacle. It's an obstacle to a formation greater than its own nature. If you could let go of this persistent tendency, that thing could build its own way in you. That would be one strategy. Hence, the first requirement for developing this is to bring your mind into complete stillness. But the stillness is not going to be a stillness of sleep or of death or of suppression. It is a conscious, awakened stillness, aspiring and opening to this higher light that says, shape me as you want. Logical, isn't it? But bring it to total stillness at will and stay in stillness as long as you can. So that's going to be the first step of doing this. Accessible, you understand it. And it's using the current capacity. It's not asking you to do something which is beyond it. And the strategy that he builds for this transition. So we continue with the text. A limited mental intelligence, enlightening a limited mind of sense, and the capacity, not always well used, of a considerable extension of it by the use of the reason, are the powers by which he is at present distinguished from all other terrestrial creatures. So he's telling you what is your current capacity. And that makes you great. You are the peak of earthly evolution. So very important point, terrestrial creatures. Terrestrial, and he's limiting it to Earth, current Earth. On other planets, it might be different. But it would be a similar pattern broadly. What is this thing that we have that distinguishes us from other terrestrial creatures? Limited mental intelligence, enlightening a limited mind of sense. So you have sense mind, mental intelligence. Both are limited. The mental intelligence is enlightening sense mind. Unlike animals which have sense mind but may not have a mental intelligence enlightening it. They would be limited, you are limited. And sometimes you're not too different from them in your sense mind. You may even be less than them. But you have this mental intelligence which might give a partial light that is also undeveloped mostly. And the capacity, not always well used, of a considerable extension of it by the use of the reason. So you're taking this mental intelligence, using the reasoning part of it and extending it a little bit, considerably, but not using it well. You're using it to justify or subvert higher truths to lesser desire impulses or others. So that's why not well used. If you had used that same thing to turn higher, you could have done much more. But nevertheless, it's just an extension of this. These are the powers by which he is at present distinguished from all other terrestrial creatures. Now you could take a dolphin, and it would be one of those very specialized beings. And if within the dolphin this mental intelligence was as if amplified, you would find they are almost as capable as humans just by that amplification. The other parts are pretty well integrated, and in various other animals. What is interesting, though, is the same animals, when they're out of the physical biology, in the subtle body, in the subtle worlds, and you meet them. For example, you meet a horse, and the horse will communicate with you, often with equal or greater intelligence than a human being, because their capacity is freed, and your capacity and their capacity are very closely matched. The sense mind, so the point was, when they're embedded in the biology, they lose a lot of it because the biology has not developed those organs. The sense mind, this intelligence, this reason, however inadequate. So remember, mind, human being, sense mind, intelligence, and the extension from intelligence of the reasoning power. So these are the three things. However inadequate are the instruments in which he has learned to put his trust. So over time, we find we can trust this, and we have built up that trust and reliance. And he has erected by their means certain foundations which he is not over willing to disturb. So your whole life you've organized around these tendencies, these capacities, and habitual patterns that you've learned to trust. And has traced limits outside of which he feels all to be confusing, uncertainty, all to be confusion, uncertainty, and a perilous adventure. Imagine doing something where your reason tells you, I don't know. You would not venture into it unless there was some very powerful drive of some passion or something, or some impulse. But if your reason says, I don't know, this is unknown, you would not want to venture. So automatically we have put certain boundaries, and we have put certain reliance on the operation of these three powers, and we don't want to disturb them too much. So again, review the powers. Sense mind, that is your mind plugged into the senses and what you know and see and feel through the senses. The intelligence, which as if standing above it, observe the sense mind and gives you judgments and observations, analysis of the value, placing, arranging the value of the sense mind using past memory. You will remember we had already had a discussion of the functioning of the mind when we were reading the text on the record of yoga. And then this reasoning power. So these are the three things broadly that we rely on. Memory is the support for this. Moreover, the transition of the higher principle means not only a difficult conversion of his whole mind and reason and intelligence, but in a certain sense, a reversal of all their methods. So if we are going to go to this higher supramental working, all of these workings, first of all, have to transition and convert themselves to a different working, but also they have to reverse their method. Our current method of the sense mind, for example, is literally look out through the senses and gather data. And from the data, you observe and try to assess what is inside that thing. So you have to go outside in, for which you need data of observations. If the supermind were to start working within you, and let's say right now, just a diluted projection of it, a ray of it as intuition, you'll feel what is behind first or what is within. But you won't know what is outside first. And then from inside out, it's as if, okay, what's the surface? What's the way it is going to express itself? You're growing inside out. Can you rely on it? Now, what is interesting is this is exactly what you need to do when you train for an exercise such as remote viewing, which is largely leaning upon the working of intuition in lower ranges within us. So in remote viewing, you are taught to suspend your mind activity. The more you allow the activity to come, the more you are going to make a mistake. So I'm looking at the military system that Ingo Swann developed for the US military. It's called CRV, Coordinate Remote Controlled Remote Viewing or Coordinated Remote Viewing, where you have a paper with a sheet with columns that you start filling out. And the trigger is a certain number. And when the number is revealed to you, it triggers instantly the intuition. So implicit is the idea the intuition is already working and the number provokes it. Because the number to your surface mind has no direct meaning. A keyword would have provoked associations. So number provokes no associations. So it allows the intuition to go through and not be mixed with associations. Immediately the intuition starts acting in you. And the first tendency of the intuition is to provoke an impulse. So you're holding a pen and you're asked as you hear the number to let the pen move, as if scribbling in a certain pattern. And you allow the impulse of the force of the intuition first to settle and get into the physical consciousness. Now, this is not how they have explained it. This is how I'm explaining from the knowledge Sri Aurobindo gives you, having studied their method. So you start moving the pen. And at that point, there's a link has formed, a kind of a link from the intuitive entry point all the way to the physical consciousness. And the next thing, you follow a series of questions. And all these questions are an inside out process. So, does it feel heavy or light? Does it feel dark or bright? Does it feel sticky or etc.? So, you start with as if a sensation of something touched. You're feeling it and you start describing the feeling. As the feeling grows, you come to something more and something more and something more. So, you're going through an inside out process. At any point, it may happen, as this starts happening, it triggers in you a familiar idea. Oh, this feels like it could be stone, or it could be metal, or it feels like it provokes an association. You are told to write that aside. There's a column specially for these words. You put it aside as something you discard. It's a very interesting idea. All associations which come by normal mind process, you write stone, you write it there. I forget the term used, but it's a term which suggests which is wrong, the wrong association. And you're telling yourself it's wrong the moment it pops up, and continue the process, stay with the process. And bit by bit, from inside out, it starts building the sensation, eventually a form and a shape, and eventually a color and an image. But the problem with remote viewing, when you go like this, from what point did you start? Let's say you were the scene which you were asked to remote view has a mountain, has a river, and in between a forest. Did it start with the river? Did it start with the mountain? Did it start with the forest? It would be totally different. So maybe you suddenly start with, oh, there's this flowing something which feels, and you end up with a description of flowing water and you say river. But there's a mountain also, right? There's a forest also. Somebody else doing the same remote view might start with a mountain. And so it feels like rock. This fellow says, no, it feels like water. It's part of the whole scene. So what do? You first do this remote view image. Then you say, what else is associated with it? And you do a second remote view. This time you might get the mountain. And you end up again with a drawing in the sketch. And you say, what else is associated with it? And this time you might get the forest. So having got 3 sketches, you will find, because it was the same one inspiration which worked in 3 sketches, there'll be one point which will be common. So you'll take as if the 3 sketches and align them around that one point, and you'll get the mountain, forest, and river. That's the process. I'm explaining to you how the CRV method works, but from the rationale that Sri Aurobindo gives us. The people who developed it did not have this kind of knowledge. It was Ingo Swann, by his intuition, following what is happening within him spontaneously, articulated and formulated a process. It works. And then it was refined by trying it out to see what worked better, etc. But if you see the rationale of this, it's obvious how it would work, isn't it? Of course, it's a brilliant job what Ingo Swann did even to formulate the structure. And I tried this a few times I tried, and it is amazing. I had other people try it also. It's actually amazing the way it works. But after a point, you ask yourself, okay, now what? You got a picture, you got something, maybe you got some insight. Maybe is there a direct way? And you would want a more direct way of consciousness where the intuition could straight go, oh, that's what it is. And that's doable. But you see, we have indirectly, by a process, forced our mind to follow a contrary process than what it would tend to do, so as to align it better with the intuition, so the intuition could work through it and express itself. But if this process could be now made familiar, which is what happened to many of the remote viewers, after a point it became so easy and smooth. So the guy is doing the remote viewing process and while having a conversation is chatting. So his outer mind is busy, distracted, while the subliminal part is doing its thing. I've seen videos of some of these people. It's quite fascinating. They deliberately do that to keep the mind away and not allow it to interfere. Now, with the yogic training, you could put your mind into a state of stillness, deliberately choose not to allow the associations to come, and you would be able to perhaps enter a state in which you could connect and identify with. So this became what they called extended remote viewing, ERV versus CRV, where the person would enter into a certain state of deep relaxation in which the mind is totally made silent. They would typically take 45 minutes to enter that state, and then they would be told the number, and which would trigger immediately an experience, and they would allow the experience to unfold. So there were people who specialized in ERV, people who specialized in CRV, and the difference was of a temperament. Those who had a more rich inner life, who could consciously set aside the surface mind, found ERV to be easier than CRV. And of course, the access was much more experiential. You would find yourself in the place, experience, feel, see, etc. But always it was the inside out process. So I've digressed. It was useful, important, but you understand the rationale. That there is the reversal of all the methods. So transition to the higher principle means not only a difficult conversion of his whole mind and reason and intelligence, but in a certain sense, a reversal of all their methods. Would you be willing to do that? Would you be willing to let go all the things upon which you currently rely on and start doing their very opposite and be uncertain to begin with and remain in uncertainty until the new capacity fully develops? So this is what happens with the remote viewers. Initially, they have very good success and they start becoming cocksure. They say, oh yeah, now it's working. And they slide back into the old habit. And then they start going wrong and terribly wrong. And then eventually they say, no, I have to stop being so cocksure and go back to that humility. And with that, the surface mind's tendency again fades and you learn to stay in that state. So you are, through a very indirect and slow process, teaching yourself to reverse the method of the working of reason, intelligence, and eventually the whole mind. But that's too indirect. We're going to use the yogic process to do this, and the processes which Sri Aurobindo will teach us can be used equally, if you had a mastery of that, to apply for remote viewing or other such means, and even use their methods, but with greater efficiency. So, this reversal of methods, would you agree to it? The soul climbing above a certain critical line of change sees all its former operations as an inferior and ignorant action, and has to effect another kind of working which sets out from a different starting point and has quite another kind of initiation of the energy of the being. So here again, it's one of those texts which you will not understand fully unless you've had some experience of it. But you will see, as we dwell on the different parts, it will be obvious and you'll say, ah, yes, that makes a lot of sense. You're climbing in gradations. With each gradation, your way of thinking is changing. You cross a certain point and then you look back and you'll see, oh, what I was doing before was so ignorant and so inferior. If you look back at from your poise of current intelligence to the way your intelligence was operating when you were 5 years old, 8 years old, 10 years old, teenager, etc. You look back and say, what a huge difference. That was a lesser way. But from this higher poise now, if you had to operate, what is your initiation? What was the initiation then? As a child, you felt an urge, you felt a fear, you felt a desire, you felt a need, a craving. And from there, certain things emerged. When you're in your rational poise of mind, what drives you? What motivates you? The initiating energy is different. And working is different. So different starting point and quite another kind of initiation of the energy of the being. Now this becomes much more radical when you shift your consciousness above or behind. Let's say you're deeply interiorized in an influence which has a strong psychic content. The normal emotional drives, motivations are not interesting. They're too crude and coarse. From this poise, though, when you start doing, the motivation is totally different. But when you start doing, the substance and the grade of energy which is starting is also very different. At some point, as it moves into action, it will use emotions, thoughts, and even the physical body movements. But the initiating energy was different. Similarly, when you take a poise slightly above, Your mind is still and you shift your attention a little higher. You feel something of the vast, as if familiarity, closeness to infinite, or even some sense of backdrop of eternity, as if. And then from there, your motivations are fundamentally different. You're not interested in short-term, superficial things. But when you start action from there, it's a different grade of substance that's flowing. But as it enters the domain of action, it will still use the same mind, life, body. It will initiate thoughts, it will initiate emotions or energies, life forces, body actions. But the starting point will be fundamentally different, and it's as if that quality will be suffused into this. One of the things you will find very helpful in the spiritual life, especially for integrating the inner with the outer, higher with the lower, is to always place yourself in the deeper or higher poise or deepest or highest currently available at the moment before you start something, before you speak, before you interact. Holding yourself in that poise, initiate the movement from there. You have to speak, you have to give a presentation, you have to write, you have to play a piece of music, you have to work, sweep, anything, code. Start the initial movement as if from that, whichever deeper or higher poise you can. And from there, let it unfold. Just that, the initial energy, he uses quite another kind of initiation of the energy of the being. Just that will change completely the outcomes as well as the forms and patterns and priorities. But this becomes even more radical when that initiating energy is from still higher. But with this, you will habituate yourself to start from a higher or inner poise than from your superficial outer poise. You break that habit by building this new habit. But already this means you must have some kind of practice that allows you to be more inwardly centered or be able to shift poise of consciousness a little bit. But start with whatever little you can. The initiating energy is different. And it makes the working also slightly different. All this prepares you for something much higher than to initiate. Now he gives this example. If all this we have to do, literally shift the starting point of our thinking and action, imagine what that means when you go all the way to the higher and compare that with an animal. So he gives this analogy. If an animal mind were called upon to leave consciently the safe ground of sense impulse, sense understanding, and instinct for the perilous adventure of a reasoning intelligence, it might well turn back alarmed and unwilling from the effort. You see, the animal is rooted in safe ground of sense impulses, sense understanding, and instinct. So through the senses, you have an impulse. You see this, you're attracted to, repelled from, straight from the sense. And with that, a kind of a sense understanding. And with that, an instinct, which is a protective instinct. So the zoo animal knows that there's danger and wants to run away before the earthquake happens. You know of all these phenomena. So often human beings will observe animals and predict earthquake or tsunami or whatever. They know. How did they know? And then now you're telling them, let go of this and start becoming like a human. And the human will no more have the instinct to protect from the tsunami. He won't sense the tsunami anymore. Will the animal say that I'll happily give this up? I can protect myself because of that instinct. The human being is so stupid, he cannot feel the tsunami that's going to happen or the earthquake that's going to happen. I know and I fear and I will run away and I will know which direction to run to avoid the earthquake. This fellow might actually go the opposite direction even if he gets a warning. But he will not even be aware. So from the animal point of view, this human has lost this capacity. The same animal, when it is sick, will chew on a grass which will make it vomit and heal it. And say, when you become a human, you'll have to read a book which will tell you eat this grass or that grass. And based on what? Where is your certainty? Somebody did some research 50 years ago and told you this grass is good for you. I know instinctively, I feel the yearning for the grass. I eat the grass. I know exactly what I know to heal, what I need to do to heal myself. Why would I give it up? That would be the animal perspective. So it might well turn back alarmed and unwilling from the effort. You're saying give up everything you have for something which is totally opposite and will take time to build it to top it all and will be less effective than what you already have to begin with, at least. The human mind would here be called upon to make a still greater change. And although self-conscious and adventurous in the circle of its possibility, might well hold this to be beyond the circle and reject the adventure. So I'll say, I'm willing to try everything. But you're telling me to give up all my intellect, all my power of reasoning, and switch to something which will be totally unreliable. I will maybe 99 out of 100 be wrong. Why would I do that? How can I rely upon that? How can I make so many mistakes? I can't afford it. So beyond his circle of adventure, which is quite small. In fact, if you want to make that change, it's not enough to say, hey, I will do it, I will take the risk. In fact, the change is only possible if there is first a spiritual development on our present level of consciousness, and it can only be undertaken securely when the mind has become aware of the greater self within, enamored of the infinite, and confident of the presence and guidance of the divine and his Shakti. So now is your precondition. You could, of course, say, I'm going to make this crazy adventure and do it, and it'll still work. And this is what happened with, let's say, the remote viewers. But two things we saw with the remote viewers, very interestingly. Initially, they had a certain intuitive, instinctive sense that this is possible. So, confidence of the presence of some kind. And as the experiences developed, they learned to trust this. And even their internal state of consciousness shifted so much, they became different people. To the point that their values were often the very opposite of what they were before. And many of them ended up with divorces and all kinds of other familial problems. And what happened after that was any new person coming for the remote viewing training, they would warn them, listen, once you go through this program and you start remote viewing, your consciousness will change so much, you will not be the same person and you might end up with a divorce. Are you ready for that? And that was a very small training if you consider remote viewing. Consider now what happens with the spiritual journey and then intuitivization and all the rest. So it's not enough that you just say, I'm going to try it out. There are consequences. And it's not enough because you don't have something to cling to. So what do you need that will give you the assurance, the stability, and the capacity and support you through this shift? And he gives you certain things. First, he says, there has to be a spiritual development on our present level of consciousness before you aim at a higher level or an inner level. Your present has to have a spiritual development, which in the framework of the integral yoga is that first phase of purification with a blend of karma yoga, jnana yoga, and bhakti yoga, which kind of purifies and loosens up the narrowness of the ego, turns to the divine, builds a familiarity, and so on. And then the formal integral yoga beginning with the first chatushtaya, in which certain base of peace and equality is built up, which kind of prepares you in a familiarity to the influence of the self. And then an opening to the Shakti with the faith, which builds a certain opening to the action of the force. So even with that kind of a base is set, and then you can move to the third chatushtaya. So first, spiritual development on our present level of consciousness, whatever that may be. Right now, we don't worry about what it is. And then it can, so this is required. It is only possible if you have this. So first requirement is you cannot do this. There's no possibility without this first spiritual development. My starting observation to most of you would be that you already have enough of this. You can always have more. But you already have enough of this if this kind of study interests you and fascinates you. It means something within you is ready. There are others, and you would perhaps tell your family members, you might say, you know what, this is a fascinating text. You need to study this. And the guys will say, what am I going to do with all this intuition? It doesn't interest me. All this divine stuff is too far off. It doesn't mean anything to them. So notice that there's already an enormous difference between you who are interested in this versus those who don't find anything useful, or at best might say, can I use this to read somebody's mind so that I can be better in my business negotiation? Yes, you can. But how long will it take? It may take 3 or 4 years of training. Sorry, not interested. If I can do it in 2 or 3 days, yeah, maybe. Better still, you do it and I'll hire you to read their mind and tell me for my advantage. It'll stop there. So you understand there's a difference first. And when that first spiritual development has happened, then all this change becomes possible. Already you find within you a certain yearning that says, yes, of course, I want this. There's nothing else more useful, more interesting, more worthwhile. At least a small part in you says. And maybe after this interaction is over, you will go back to your normal life and worries, and that little part might recede or get covered up, but it is there. And maybe next Saturday when you read or when you pick up the book again, it comes forward, but it's there. So this initial base, I would say for most of us, is good enough. You can, of course, grow it. But then second point, he says, this change is only possible with the first spiritual development, but it can be undertaken securely. The stability, safety in the transition. Only when mind has become aware of the greater self within, enamored of the infinite, and confident of the presence and guidance of the divine and its Shakti. So these are the three things which will give security. Security is not about feeling insecure. It's about reliability also of the transition. So secure is in that way, not just an emotional insecurity. It's the security of the nature of the transition itself. Otherwise, if without these three things, there will be an instability in the working, and as a result, too many errors, which would perhaps create trouble for you. Unfortunately, a lot of people tend to fall into this error when they take to spiritual life. And I see this especially strongly in the West, now increasingly in India also, where they start operating from the position of the intelligence based on things read and arranged in some belief structure. Oh, if I do this, this will happen. This is how it works. And there are all these, a lot of junk in the internet, laws and principles of whatever channeled contents of various things. Some of them are partially true. Many of them are majorly erroneous. But you've built up a certain belief system. And now you start doing this and that around it. You're so confident because you've read it somewhere or somebody told you with confidence, and that you confidently put yourself majorly wrong. And then you're stuck in that round. The evidence of the inner sensitivity, which can say, it feels right, it feels mixed, it feels wrong, that is not there. And so they often lose themselves in all kinds of things, sometimes wasting years. Some are happy because they feel they're doing something. And I would say for many of them, they are not yet really in the spiritual life. They're rather escaping something which is for them uncomfortable. Those who are genuinely in the spiritual life will feel quickly, this is not working, something's wrong, and would start either going deeper, led by a deeper intuition, or look for elsewhere. But when they find something they recognize, a good example is somebody I had met in Auroville, a Frenchman, he said, he read Sri Aurobindo's words and he said, this is truth speech. I know this. This is where I have to go. This is what I have to do. That's it. Instantly the recognition. Where did that come from? Something deep within recognizes. That's why the becoming aware of the greater self within. Now, you might not be directly aware of it, but its influence has to be somewhat distinctly strong in you. If that is there, this first tendency for error and falling into wrong beliefs would be avoided. Second, he says, enamored of the infinite. Now, you don't need the enamored of the infinite if the goal is not to enter into the higher ranges of consciousness. You can stay in experiences of descent of various experiences and stay within your narrowness. But if you want to ascend into a freer, higher, deeper range, this enamored of the infinite, capital I. So it's not just the presence of the divine, it is the sense of the divine in its fullness. And enamored, you are in love with. It's as if something deep within you says, I need, I want, I yearn for, and without this, something is missing. As if something in you is captivated, captured, attracted, held by, and somewhere it says there's nothing more important. And again, it might be a tiny part of you, which may be easily covered up once you get back into your normal life. But if it is there, that's your starting point. But then you must consciously allow these things to come forward. The awareness of the greater self within, the part in you that is enamored of the infinite must become more and more in the front. Bring these into reference in your life. And then the third, confident of the presence and guidance of the divine and his Shakti. So the distinction between divine and his Shakti, there is the divine presence, and then there is the power of the divine mother, power of the presence. There's a distinction in the relationship of both. Ideally, you would be aware of both, but you start with that which is naturally easier depending on your temperament. It makes a big difference if you have particularly, as quickly as possible, a certain confidence in the presence of the Shakti. So the confidence will grow with frequent contact, confidence in the presence and confidence in the guidance. These two things, and they will follow in the sequence. Initially, you will feel the presence and you will learn to lean back, rest on it, call on it, lean for it for support. And as the presence, so to say, infuses or supports you, with it, certain things you will feel spontaneously right or wrong, or certain directions set, and that will be how the guidance initially will grow. And at some point, you learn to rely on the guidance. When that starts happening, and it won't happen right at the beginning, when that starts happening, then again, you will have the security for this transition to take place. Remember, the goal is the transition of the consciousness to the higher voice, for which you need this. Let's just remind ourselves. First, a first spiritual development on our present level of consciousness. So this goes through some kind of basic purification, refinement, turning to the inner and higher, coming under their influence of some kind. And let's assume you have something of it. Well, let it grow. It's never enough. Let it grow. But you have a starting point. Then you have the security when you become aware of the greater self within. So more and more the sense of the presence. This will have two elements again. One will be the sense of the psychic presence within you, and the sense will be as if the second will be a sense of the something larger, freer, wider, truer, deeper being that is you, as if supporting behind. Whichever, one or both, doesn't matter. But some sense of the deeper you, of which the surface, in relation to which the surface feels superficial. Then, enamored of the infinite, something yearns for, wants, needs, is in love with, missing that when it's not there. And growing confidence, growing presence, and the confidence in the presence and the guidance of the divine and his Shakti. Again, I will suggest something of all these is already there within you, perhaps. Become aware of it. Dwell on it. And by awareness, by dwelling, it will grow more and its influence will extend in you. Eventually, you must make a distinction of its influence extending in your mind, extending in your heart, in your emotions, even at some point extending in your sense mind, and eventually at some point even in the body instincts. But start with whatever is easiest, whichever is easiest, wherever it is easiest, let it grow and know that eventually it should extend all over. The first Chatushtaya and the second Chatushtaya of the integral yoga already contain this. They would have already prepared you for this. Now comes the next step. Well, we have this, let's say, some basic security is available now for making this transition. How do you make the conversion? And I will leave the greater part of this for next time, but just start with the key idea. The problem of this conversion resolves itself at first into a passage through mediary status. And by the help of the one power already at work in the human mind, which we can recognize as something supramental in its nature, or at least in its origin, the faculty of intuition, a power of which we can feel the presence and the workings, and are impressed when it acts by its superior efficiency, light, direct inspiration, and force, but cannot understand or analyze it as we understand or analyze the workings of our reason. This is your intermediate passage, mediary intermediate status, by the help of the intuition as the power. And that makes possible this conversion to the supramental. Effectively, what he's saying, you have already a certain faculty of intuition working in you. You can feel its presence and it's working sometimes, not yet in an active, reliable way. But when it's there, you have its superior efficiency, light and direct inspiration and force, but you don't understand. You can't analyze it. You can't activate it at will, but it's there. So at least recognize that it's there. And that power, that faculty of intuition, is in its origin supramental. Or different vocabulary, Sri Aurobindo says, the ray of the supermind is infinite. You can't meet it until your consciousness is familiar with the infinite. But a finite ray of the sun is intuition. See, the ray, what is its thickness compared to the infinite? Nothing. It's infinitesimally thin. It's finite. So intuition is like a finite ray of the infinite supramental consciousness. As a faculty, it is already there within you. It is that which reflects in the animal consciousness as instinct. In us, in a more mentalized consciousness, more clearly when it operates freely as an intuition. But then what can you do? How can you consciously activate the intuition and even allow the intuition to grow into you and maybe begin to live in the intuitive consciousness using your mind as it is, but operating from intuition using the mind? And if you can do that, then that intuition, being a ray of the supermind, when it opens out to its own sense of infinity, would open you to supermind. And when it engages with your mind, would be the link point between the supermind and your mind. You see how he solves the problem. Amazing. And very practical when you see how he will teach you to open to the intuition. That will be the rest of the paragraph, rest of the chapter, which we will take up next time. But I want to pause here. Let all this sink into you. Prepare yourself, build in yourself the basic requirements, or at least recognize they are within you and activate them, bring them more and more vividly, consciously as influences in your daily life. One of the things I will suggest as a practice, every day, when you start your day, give yourself 10, 15, 20 minutes, if you can, half an hour. Shift your consciousness inward, interiorizing as much as possible, not in emotions, behind emotions, or if you're aware of your subtle body, shift into a deeper poise in the subtle awareness. I will say inner mind, inner vital, in the subliminal direction, as much as you can. Stay in it. If you can, from there, open to what is above. Feel the presence of the self, the peace above, in whatever way you feel above you. Or if you find this inward movement difficult, just start with the above movement, opening. Whichever is available, if both, even better. Doesn't matter which. Stay in it, habituate yourself to it. And then start your day from that poise. What that means would be, from that state, you review all the things you have to do in the day. And let's say you're sitting in this concentration. Let that initiate your day. So you're sitting, you wait, you don't get up. You let it make you get up, as if. So you wait until something of that moves you and makes you to get up and walk, and then stay in that state as long as you can. Doesn't matter if it fades out. The idea is to hold the initiating poise as long as possible until eventually it blends into your daily routine, daily consciousness. Do not worry. Start with this quality, substantiality of the energy of it. If you can, during the day, whenever you have to do something which requires a different grade, value, or focus, shift yourself again as much as you can at that moment, inward, upward, or combination. Hold that poise, feel the presence, hold the awareness of the Divine Mother, or feel the love for the Divine Mother, or you feel her force, whichever way, whatever works for you at that moment. And then let the initiation of the action begin from there. whether it is speaking, writing, drawing, painting, walking, anything. Let the initiation happen from there. Again, you will lose yourself eventually. Do not worry. Focus on the initiating quality of consciousness and energy, poise from which you start. If you can, consciously dwell on the awareness of the presence in a general way, awareness of the mother's presence, awareness of your love and trust and reliance on her, and the enamored of the infinite will happen also with the concept of the mother as not just this fixed human form, but as the cosmic divine mother who is everywhere in the universe. So if you just focus on this one idea of the divine mother as the presiding Shakti in the whole universe and open to her as her infinite presence and deepen this relationship, you have as if the blend of all these. So something deep within you opens to her, which knows her, knows yourself as a child of the Divine Mother. So you have already the greater sense of the self, of the greater self within, enamored of the infinite because it is her body, her form, her vast presence of love, Shakti, and the confidence that builds with that. So in a sense, in a single movement, you have all these facets included. Dwell on this, hold this if you can once a day sometimes. If it helps, use a starting point of reading from some text, from some passage of Savitri, or some writing, speeches of the mother, or writing of Sri Aurobindo. Anything which reminds you of the presence, and then use that as an entry point to remain just dwelling in this. These would be very practical starting points which would prepare and build the base for the outcomes which he's teaching you. And then from here, we will read the chapter, rest of the chapter, and focus on how to awaken this power of intuition, which is already latent. You don't have to do anything, it's there. You will activate it and rely upon it more and more and make a kind of a shift to be more and more based in it. And then from there, that will happen, the opening to the supermind. So I think I'm going to pause the text here and just quickly look at the chat box. So Bruno has a question. During a retreat, I had a profound experience, a complete glimpse of divine connection, an upward surge, and receiving an infinite vibration of love, joy, and peace. And at the same time, I had the feeling that it was me, yet it wasn't me anymore. Since then, I can clearly see that my ego wants to recreate this experience and that this enormous expectation is an obstacle. How can I calm this expectation and this ego that wants to relive it? So first recognize that when you had this experience, you were already in a kind of special state, intensely interiorized and already prepared and staying in a state of deep immersion built up over several days. In that state, that experience was easy to access. The fact that you could access it is your surety that the experience is yours and will be yours forever, for the rest of your life and further. So let the mind at least recognize and accept that this is yours. It will never be lost. Once you've had it, it's yours. The part in you from where you had the access to it is slightly behind and above than where you are currently. And that's all. You need to as if shift that center to be able to access it. In the beginning, when such deep and radical life-changing experiences happen, it's good to allow its impact to fully settle in all of you. Each time you have an experience, it leaves an imprint, and the imprint as if shapes everything, changes everything. Let's say if you use the analogy in evolution, each time a new grade of consciousness emerges, it has to turn back upon everything else and reorganize it in its terms. So the human mind will reorganize by pulling you out of sense mind, but all the way down into the most material activities and even gradations of consciousness. Something like that happens with any spiritual experience of this kind, that you have to allow its influence to fully settle. Know that by allowing it to settle more fully, the access will now be easier. The gap between from where you had the experience and where you are, that gap will become less and less. So use this you're saying my ego wants to recreate this experience and it's an obstacle. I will say no, turn it around so that it is the joy and the yearning and aspiration of the surface lower part. Don't make a big deal about the ego. It's the joy and aspiration and yearning for this which is calling you. And it's a good thing. Let it be for you then an aspiration. What you need to do is in the part that is agitating and struggling in expectation, bring calm and this faith that it is there. She will give you the experience and allow whatever integration process is currently on to be more completely settled. So when you bring calm into this agitated part, which is yearning, and then open it in a kind of a pure turn, what you will find is something of that experience will as if approach. You may not have it fully the way you had then, but just yearning for it and feeling it and staying very quiet, it's as if it comes close and you feel its power. You recognize it because the experience is known to you. You recognize it and you stay with it. And let its power settle in you. And do not worry if the full thing does not come at that moment. Just that what comes is a wave of it. Let it fill you, suffuse you. Let it integrate. And then again, after a while, you will again, after a few days perhaps, again turn in this very pure, still, quiet aspiration. And maybe this time it will be slightly deeper, or a certain other aspect of it will be felt more and flow and fill you. And in this way, do not see it as an obstacle. Rather, it's a great strength that your whole being and a significant part of your being, the center of your being, what you call your surface being, what you call your ego. And the word has a negative connotation, but you say you, the surface person, is yearning and aspiring for this. What a wonderful thing, isn't it? So let the familiarity build and the closeness gradually grow. And trust that it will come more and more into you. And with it, through the slower graded process, what will be received will become more frequent, more stable, and eventually will settle in permanence without any struggle in between. Again, in between, you might have occasional deep experiences, and again, as if a partial receding, and then again, that's normal. But the point is, don't aim for the fullness of it, aim for the closeness to it and the partial influence that may come initially from it, but in the quietness of this joy of the aspiration. But I would say you should celebrate the fact that your ego sense wants it, isn't it? Don't see it as an obstacle. It's a great strength. When the central part of your most surface person has felt the familiarity and is yearning for the divine, everything, your life is now already turned. The rest is inevitable. I don't know if I understand the question from NNQ. Satprem expressed so much suffocation, anguish, tearing apart feeling in such a breakdown state when one is on the brink of death and darkness. How does one function in mundane and professional work? Whatever state you're describing is not a spiritual state. Satprem had difficulties. He had severe depressions and sometimes even suicidal tendencies. Maybe you're referring to that. Don't make the mistake of thinking of it as a spiritual state. He had problems. He had also spiritual experiences. Recognize the difference between the two. Do not think that this state of breakdown and anguish and suffocation is a good thing. It's not. If you're feeling anguish and suffocation, it's because something in you is suffocating. And the solution for that is consciously to open to the presence. And when you feel the presence, you will not feel suffocation, you will feel the fullness of the presence. When you do not have the presence, you will feel the suffocation. So the correction is precisely to open to the presence in whatever way you find easiest. There are many directions you could open to it. One is outward. You go to a space where you feel the presence. Use the external support. For example, in the ashram near the samadhi, in the Matrimandir or some sacred space. Certain temples, not all, some of them have a very suffocating presence. Certain temples have a purifying, uplifting presence, perhaps if the crowd is not there, or certain centers where you have a gathering of people with an aspiration and a presence is built up. Use these supports. Even you can use nature, beautiful, happy nature, as an entry point. Use external means, or turn inward and feel the presence within, or turn upward and feel the presence above. Or while reading, you read from Savitri the lines which evoke the presence or the description of the inner and higher worlds which evoke that. Use that as an entry point. Use a memory, use a piece of music which evokes something of that. So there could be many entry points. Find what works for you and use that as your starting point. But do not associate spiritual states with these terms. This is actually the contrary of it. When the higher thing comes, when you feel the presence and the joy which comes with it, then you will find you can easily extend it into your work, mundane or professional work, as you put it. You can extend it. Initially, extend it as an entry point, as I discussed earlier. Even if you lose it afterwards, don't worry. And then every now and then you take brief moments to remember that, feel good about that, and then continue. That is how you might find it easy to integrate with your daily life. Shanta is asking, is it possible for the supermind to enjoy itself like a human mind doing research and learning? Yes, but its research would be of a very different kind because all knowledge would be available to it, isn't it? So its research would be how it can apply that knowledge and work out to manifest some new possibilities. Or remember also what Sri Aurobindo says, there's a graded development. So initially there would be stages where you will grow in the access to the supermind and its capacities and powers. And with each of those, there will be also a power of expression which will grow. So Mother puts it in this way that in the supramental evolution itself, there will be those who are younger ones and more mature ones. And the measure will be in their capacity to use the power or the consciousness and the access to the knowledge that they have. But it will still be common in that it will be a grade of consciousness which will not have ignorance. That will be the common feature. Okay, another question from Bruno. I had a completely involuntary but incredible experience of remote viewing while I was daydreaming. 4K, meaning high resolution image, appeared before his eyes about a person who was located a few kilometers away. And I got on the motorcycle. Within 15 minutes, I was able to verify that the scene was real. Yes, that's a good thing. So it shows you that the ability is easy when you are in that state. So you were daydreaming, you had no particular intention, and it's as if a part of your awareness simply leaned into and glimpsed that. You could do the exact same thing now consciously. So you put yourself in this state where you have no particular expectation, lean back into a consciousness which is freer and wider. And then if you turn your consciousness towards someone or something or a situation or a problem that you have, from that state, turn your gaze like you turn a spotlight. You're not trying to create something, you're not trying to understand something, you simply let the awareness light up and stay still and let it reveal itself. And you'll find you don't need to remote view necessarily, but you'll find the knowledge unveiling. And if you're very quiet, you'll find layers and then another layer and another layer. And at some point, your mind will turn, hey, what about that? And then another layer will open. And that's generally how the experience unfolds when it becomes familiar. Revati is asking, how does one break the attachment to the forms of divine incarnation instead of concentrate on the formless divine? How would this help? I'm not sure that you need to do that. You don't need to break the attachment to forms. It's good to break attachment, but you don't need to give up form entirely and focus on the formless. I would simply say become familiar with the formlessness of it. So even when you have a form, what is it that you feel emerging from the form? What is the nature of the presence that you feel? And you dwell on the presence, and at some point, the particular form becomes as if a window. The window has a square shape or a circle shape or a triangle shape. But what you see through it becomes more important. And at some point, you forget the window shape and you just dwell on what pours out from it, or what you feel through it. And if you can, as if you go through the window and feel the fullness of it, which opens out into a wideness, into infinity. So you could take even a very low grade form. There are Mother Sri Aurobindo makes the distinction between Mahakali and Kali. Kali is a reflection in the vital plane, for example, and sometimes even terrifying forms. So when you read Ramakrishna Paramahansa's experience with Kali, it is not at all the physical shape. It's as if for him, that was the entry point, and from there he would open to cosmic aspect of the Divine Mother. So the physical shape is almost irrelevant. But if you find it helpful, take a physical entry point that is for you familiar and evokes within you a joy and love, and then use that as the gateway to go as if beyond. You don't have to give up form or suppress that, just transcend the limitation that form implies to go to the fullness of the experience. How would it help? Because it will open you to the deeper truth behind. If you limit yourself to the form, it's as if you're binding yourself to something. So let's say you have a picture of Vishnu with 4 arms. Well, he's stuck with 4 arms. So you can help only 4 people at a time. These things are implicit to our thinking. When you pass through that and feel the cosmic presence that is Vishnu, he's everywhere, in million arms. See? No arms even, forget arms, is simultaneously, instantaneously, equally present everywhere. That's a much more complete experience of the quality that is Vishnu, or the quality that is any of the deities of your Ishta Devata. Much more with the Divine Mother. Even with this, for those of us who are familiar with this particular form of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, the experience people had. You went to meet Sri Aurobindo, my teacher, MP Pandit. He said it was as if he was meeting the Himalayas, meaning the consciousness just opened out to this massive power, presence, infinity, capital I. You can't help it. It feels like that. Hold that. So look at the photograph if that helps you, or even set aside the photo. Feel his presence and open out to what that is, what he is. And you'll know him more deeply than if you stop with, the one who places his hand, and the hand is only a human extension of his fullness. Manoj is asking how to feel the mother's presence in the heart constantly. I would simply say, do not worry about constantly. Do you feel the presence already? If you do, enjoy the presence at specific moments where you focus on full immersion, as complete as you can. After that, you bathe in the afterglow of that experience. The presence is still there, but now my mind turns to my work and I enter my work from the state of immersion in presence. So link it using the entry point from that state. Do not worry if the presence is not felt after. What you will find very quickly, that while in the work you have as if forgotten it, but the moment you disengage from the work and say, where is the presence? Ah, yes, it is there still. Maybe not as strongly, it's as if receded to the back. Then you lean back as if rest in it until it grows, and then again re-engage with the work. If you do it once a day to begin with, it's good. And then if you can make frequent partial connections, that will be better. But start with that. Do not aim at constancy. That's secondary. The fact of a strong contact of deep immersion will maintain an inner constancy and build that slowly. That is more useful than your mind being occupied in the constancy. Then you can't do anything outside, and you will not have the bridging of the inner with the outer. Manoj Chaudhary is saying how to step back. I don't know what you mean by step back, but I will tell you what I understand by the phrase. You recognize your consciousness has many layers, and you are normally living on a very superficial part of it. And you notice it's as if you take a position of an observer to what you are doing, and automatically you're shifted in slightly. It's a kind of a mental step back, which is good already as a start. But then if you take a more general sense, feel that movement and stand back a little more, you'll find your perspective enlarges. It's not just you also look at everything else, and the relationship with all else, a bigger picture forms. And all these would be useful for a kind of a mental step back. But more than a step back, a shift in state of consciousness is what I was speaking of earlier, interiorizing. And that you will develop more easily by noticing what happens when you're in a state of deep immersion with the presence. And then it's as if from that to come out takes time. When you're in deep immersion, sometimes it's difficult to speak because you're interiorized. And speaking forces you as if to come out, and it takes you time to come out. Notice that shift. That's more precious than just a mental stepping back. Hold that, familiarize yourself with that, and then learn to make that shift consciously. As you're able to do this, you'll find you can live from a poise which is more interiorized. This will be critical in our practice of the intuition. We will be discussing that next time. So next Saturday, unfortunately, I will have to be traveling. So we will put up a video, some other program which has not been posted earlier. We will continue this text on the Saturday after, which will be the 7th of February. For those who had asked about Mark's program, there were many questions of people asking how to register, or is there some money to be paid? No, there is nothing, no money, no registration required. The lecture of Mark is on 15th of February in Savitri Bhavan in Oroville from morning 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. There will be a break in between, but there's no arrangement of food or anything like that. In his first program, we had put a registration because we had also arranged for the lunch break and things like that. There's no such thing, so there's no registration required. You can freely come and join there. Some have asked if there is a way for them to travel from Pondicherry to Oroville. At the moment, at least, we have not planned something. If there is any plan to organize a collective vehicle bus or something like that, I will announce that on 7th. But right now, nothing has been planned. So that's all for today. I will remind you of the work to be done from what we have read, what you can put into practice. I would suggest for those of you, if it interests you, review this. Go through the text on your own, or listen to the video if that helps you. But observe particularly how Sri Aurobindo is changing your perspective, shifting your state of consciousness in relation to the supermind, familiarizing you with its way of working as opposed to your current working, and through that familiarity, building in you the capacity to bridge. All of this is very important and very precious. It's a new way of thinking, it's a new way of seeing, it's a new way of knowing. And even if the mind can simulate it to some extent, it gets a glimpse of, oh, that's what it might be like. Of course, it's very different when you experience it, but still, it prepares you. And in the preparation, you recognize what you need to let go and what you need to turn towards. And then the practical guidances of how you can assist the preparation. All of this will be helpful when we take up the text the next occasion, and we will look at the practices which he recommends for opening to intuitive consciousness. This is why we have taken birth, at least for those of us who feel called to the supramental and the integral yoga. We are born here for this. So there's a deep joy and a deep satisfaction when you read this, when you feel the truth of it, and when you feel deep within you the intuition that this is within your reach. Cherish that and let it grow. Let's take a moment to concentrate in aspiration. Namaste.